Have you seen those dramatic films? Two people fall in love only to have one person forced to watch as some horrific disease takes the other. That's how all this makes me feel. You see, I love this country. Now I'm watching it die. I love this planet, and I'm watching it die. Bulgaria is experiencing one of the most extreme population declines in the world. There were 9 million people here not so long ago. Pretty soon, that'll be 5. Today, every 9 minutes, another person disappears. Every 2 weeks, a village vanishes from the map. But other countries have the same disease. More than half the European Union is in demographic crisis. Japan and South Korea are aging faster than ever. And in the US, economic conditions are turning previously great cities like Detroit into ghost towns. Every time a town dies, something else happens. Something no one expects or is even there to witness. Something beautiful. Nature returns. Roads give way to raspberry bushes. Buildings are taken over by insects and weeds. Animals that haven't roamed these valleys and plains for decades or centuries come back. Even mighty rivers change their course. All over, bits of earth return to the way they once were, free of human interference, greed, and destruction, free from dams, logging, garbage, dumping, but still not entirely free. The poison we throw into the air every day respects no boundaries. Even nature, with all her power, all her vastness, what can she do in the face of us? Not much. But then it hit me. Without people, there'd be no one to poison the soil. No one to cut down the trees. No one to pollute the air. Maybe that's it. Maybe depopulation is the answer to the planet's survival. What if all the renewable energy in the world can't do what Bulgaria is doing just by vanishing? After all, left unchecked, climate change threatens the very existence of humanity. So maybe dying villagers are doing more to stop climate change than any eco-friendly urbanite ever could. Maybe extinction isn't the disease, it's the cure. Are you ready to be extinct? I'm not.
Why do I keep working with bees? Why did I start with bees as a kid and always kind of have them in my life? I can't really answer that other than they just make me think. Honeybees are the canary in the coal mine. They're really the indicators of our environmental health.
You know, we all got here very honestly.
Yeah.
Together we made these problems and we have to solve them.
Absolutely.
And by helping to get more of us involved in the process.
And here's a very odd honey spoon. The deal with it is that it's relatively small, which is perfect for honey. I work harder now than I did 30 years ago. And that's because bees don't survive as well because they're sick. Yeah, well, I guess some days you do want the big scoops. But this is kind of a more manageable size, I would say. Yeah, you'll taste this. It's also nice in this. There's a slight bitterness in this. Okay. But there's a little bit, so keep turning the spoon, so no remedial dripping here. Plus I'll embarrass myself and have to lick it off the floor. That's so fucking good. In the 14th century, where honey was more expensive than gold. Yeah, I mean, I can remember as a little child looking at bees and being really completely overwhelmed by it. It's, as a young child, it's really overwhelming.
Tim.
Yeah, come here, you little monster. What are you doing? Hey, wait, where's your bee shirt today, huh? You got bees on this one. How nice. All right, look at the size of that bee. Yeah, I have a question. Do you think that's a honey bee or what kind of a bee do you think that is? Do you have any guess?
I'll tell you this, I know how to stay away from bees so they won't sting you.
So you know the thing with the bee, what you don't want to do is you don't want to blow on it. Because that'll get them scared because it's CO2. Certainly a piece to climate change is that we are seeing on a micro level are all these big spikes of weather all over the place. And along with these spikes of weather, we're seeing habitat change, we're seeing, strange storms, so how do we have an integration of different forms of sustainability in the face of the changing landscape?
I have a son. He may become a beekeeper. Who knows? I would certainly caution him against doing so. So my legacy as a beekeeper for my 9-year-old son is that I want him to know not only should he, but I think it's also his duty to get involved with deeply understanding the outdoor world and helping to protect it. And if he does that through beekeeping, fine. If he does it through filmmaking, fine. If he does it through, I want him to know, my legacy to him is to know that he actually has a duty and a responsibility as a citizen of this world to help take care of it.
Backs join in 2, 1, backs in. That's right, everybody's pressing. We're going up for a dozen in 2, 1, and it's up. Good. 6, let's press. 8. The scent, yeah, it's really bad. In the course of a year, the CSOs that are located at the Royals Fair Marina, I believe we have about, if I'm correct, 2.3 million gallons of sewage overflow, which is a lot.
I don't know, how would you describe that smell?
Shit barbecue. See right there, we have CSOs that dump the stormwater into the marina. And right here, you can see the actual dirty water crossing as it's going into the marina.
It's a great area to paddle in. But in terms of, I think, water quality, that's something that's always been very poor, progressively getting worse as the years go by. One of our concerns is that we're a group of cancer survivors, so we've got people in different stages of recovery, and health and wellness is a big thing for us. Throughout the course of the years, we've been really trying to do some advocacy to get the bay cleaned up. 2 members of the team found out about the oyster project. And they brought that information to us, and we actually thought that it was a really good thing that we can get involved with, because we know that one oyster filters about 50 gallons of water a day. I think our larger goal is to have an oyster reef here at the marina. Now, you know, we're doing our oyster gardening with maybe 1,000 to 2,000 oysters, and it does make a difference because, like I said, it creates an environment for other organisms. But with an oyster reef, we're looking at maybe 1 million plus oysters, and then the oysters multiplying, and then the home that it creates for other bodies to live and filter.
New York Harbor actually used to have the largest population of oysters in the whole world, and essentially due to pollution and overharvesting, the natural habitat of oysters completely died out. I work for the Billion Oyster Project. My main role is managing the restaurant partnerships for the shell collection program. At the moment, we collect about 7,200 pounds of shells every single week. The shell collection program collects reclaimed oyster shells from 54 restaurants, and then from there they go to our hatchery on Governor's Island. That's where we grow the oysters, and then after that, that's when they get put back into New York Harbor. Right here, this little boat, that's Grand Banks.
Part of the mission that we execute on here is giving back to the community. A couple different ways, one of which is by collecting our oyster shells and donating them to the Billion Oyster Project.
Got here?
So we have a selection of oysters from the East Coast. We have Montauk pearls.
So I'm a chef by trade, and I am also a huge fan of seafood. And what comes with that is the responsible use of seafood.
Oysters are amazing for 3 primary reasons. Their reefs are great homes for other marine species. The reefs have the potential to act as barriers when there's harmful or extreme weather, and they have purifying properties, so they filter water at amazing rates, which then, of course, in turn makes oceans healthier. Oyster larvae, in their first couple weeks of life, they're free swimming organisms.
At some point, when they see suitable conditions, they will sink and latch themselves onto a already existing oyster bed.
So we essentially put free swimming larvae in tanks with the shell, and then up to 20 baby oysters will grow on each shell.
We've got maybe 2,000 oysters here, but thinking about a reef that may have 1 million oysters or how many ever, we think about that large quantity and also the environment and that it creates for other organisms that filter, like sea squirts, they filter as well. So I think I'm just very excited about the possibility of what could happen.
I read somewhere that if you're not working on something that's going to take longer than your own lifetime, you're not working on something big enough. And the Billion Oyster Project is certainly a project that is bigger than any one person, any one person's life. It took generations for us to destroy all the oysters. It's probably going to take generations for us to put them all back together.
We're in it for the long haul, and so, you know, I would love to see 5 years from now, 6 years from now, what a difference the marina is going to look like.
By 2045, seas are predicted to rise at least 2 or 3 feet because of the damage that we've already done. There is no turning back from that. Seas are going to rise 2 to 3 feet within my lifetime and my generation's lifetime. By 2060, they could rise 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 feet if we continue on the path that we're going on right now. So in my future, I may not be able to live in Miami because of sea level rise and climate change. My name is Delaney Reynolds. I'm a senior at Palmer Trinity School, and I am the founder of the Sink or Swim Project and MiamiSeaRise.com. The way that climate change works is humans have cars, or they work at factories, and these cars and factories and other man-made machines emit carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases into our atmosphere. And the more greenhouse gases that we put into our atmosphere, the more our sun's rays get trapped in the atmosphere. And when that happens, it warms the atmosphere up. And as that happens, it also warms our oceans up, which causes all of the glaciers in Greenland and Antarctica and the poles to start to melt. And as they melt, that adds to the water in our oceans, which eventually causes sea level rise on the coasts. We have a house in the Florida Keys on a 1,000-acre island called No Name Key, and it has 43 solar-powered homes on it, and it's in the middle of a few nature reserves. And so there's a bunch of different types of animals there. And so I decided that I wanted to write these books on the animals there in the Keys. As I researched those animals and learned more and more about them, I also learned about climate change and how it was affecting those animals and the island that we lived on, as well as Miami. And as I learned more and more about climate change, I realized that I wanted to do something about it. And so I decided I wanted to write a fourth book about climate change, except this time it was going to be geared towards young adults, and it was going to have stories about people who have encountered it already, to tell the story of what climate change is and what it's doing to us so that any person could read it and understand it. In 10th grade at Palmer Trinity School, I took a class called the Academy of Agents of Change, and it required each of its students to create a sustainable initiative. Through that course, I took the book that I was working on and I integrated it with the class. And that's how I created what I call the Sink or Swim Project, and along with it, my website, MiamiSeaRise.com. Through the Sink or Swim Project, what I do is I give lectures to people anywhere in South Florida, and through these lectures, I tell kids what's happening, how they can help, what they can do, and the response to that has been amazing. Kids are interested in solving this because they know that this is their future that is going to be impacted. The number one thing that I would recommend would be to install solar power on your home, because once it's installed, you don't have to pay really anything for it, and it's a sustainable way to get energy. And you can also take part in something called net solar metering. So when you're not at your solar powered home, all the energy that you aren't using, you can sell back to the power company. Second thing that I would say to do would be to reach out to your political leaders and tell them to help. Miami Beach is already being impacted. From king tides, all of the streets are being flooded, and they're having to build pumps and they're having to raise roads, and at least they're doing something. And then the third thing is, when you talk to your political leaders, try to convince them to get rid of fossil fuels completely. Coal, putting it into our atmosphere, is one of the main problems of climate change. As we put more carbon dioxide into our atmosphere, it warms it up, which warms up the ocean, which melts the ice, which causes all this sea level rise. So it all comes back to putting those fossil fuels into our atmosphere. So the more we stop that, whether it be by putting a tax on carbon or outlawing the use of fossil fuels at all, that's the number 3 thing that we have to do. And another big concern to me would be the Everglades and the Florida Keys. These are 2 very special places that basically no other state has. And they are at dire risk. They have species that are already going extinct. The Everglades has coral reefs that are already being bleached, and it's a huge problem. If you're passionate about it, put your voice out there. There's always hope for a better future, and if you want to be a part of that, go for it. This is your path. This is your future. If you're passionate about something, speak out about it, make it a point, make it important. Convince them that you're going to make a difference and that they should join you.
In the past, we relied on traditional alternatives to reach big masses.
I think it will depend in great measure upon what we do here.
Nowadays, social media and emerging technologies have forever changed the landscape of human interaction. By typing on a keyboard, you can literally change the world. How much power can this unity give us as individuals? Do we really have the power to produce change? In Riverland, they think it is possible.
I think you all know it because I've been talking about it for a while. I'm talking about the Riverland Road property.
I've lived in this community all my life. I'm 62 years old. I've lived in Fort Lauderdale for 62 years. Right? I lived on this piece of property for 30 years. I mean, as you look around, the trees, the landscape, there's no other place like this in Fort Lauderdale.
This is not typical Fort Lauderdale. This is very old Florida. It has this very unique feeling that I have not gotten anywhere else.
In January 2015, D.R. Horton, one of the largest developers in the country, introduced a petition to develop several homes in the heart of this quiet community.
A sign went up on the property down the street.
And there was big yellow notices up. We all looked at it and we saw they want to replat this property from one piece of property to 14 pieces of property.
The neighborhood sort of instantly went into a little mini uproar.
We only had like a week to do this because the planning and zoning only requires 2 weeks notice to fight this thing or to give you advance warning of it. We went ahead, we got together, we spoke from our hearts. The planning and zoning folks voted 4-4 and 4 against.
50-50, for and against, which was the equivalent of a denial.
The developer withdrew the application. After road surveys, tree scans, drainage calculations, and countless reports, they came back a year later with a new proposal, only to remove 1 unit out of the original 14.
And we were shocked, actually. My neighbor across the street was going, what are we going to do about this?
We became a civic association, so that was also part of the formation of the Riverland Preservation Society.
We even had a meeting with the D.R. Horton folks because we wanted input from them. They were supposed to reach out to the community, reach out to people that were within 350 feet or 300 feet of that piece of property. They didn't do that. We were hoping that we could, by interacting with the city, that we could alter some of that development process.
A core group of people really concerned. Fortunately, having the electronic means for getting that word out in a larger way, we were able to really make changes.
We use the social media, using Facebook, Twitter, and MailChimp, the riverlandpreservation.org.
Of course, email campaigns.
The Green Blog site.
A group of us have become amazing Facebook sharers, which worked out great. Hey, remember there's a meeting tonight at 7 o'clock, it's at such and such a place.
You had to try to keep people up and excited and engaged about it.
We started the change.org petition.
We had about 15 to 1,600 signatures in the end. Change.org, thank you very much. I mean, on that piece of property is 485 trees, many specimen oaks that are 20 and 30 and 40 inches wide that are 100 to 150 to 200 years old. It's got tortoises, it's got foxes, it's got burrowing owls, it's got all kinds of environmental things that we want to maintain. Excuse me. You just don't take a bulldozer and take those down. You just don't.
The idea that you should go in and knock it down, cut it down, so that you can be in that space.
All you have to prove is that you can cut up this piece of property into 12, 13, 14 pieces as long as it meets so many units per acre. The tree business comes later, the roads, the safety, traffic, all that comes after the fact, which in our minds was all backwards.
we have to be the change we want to see in the world. And if there's something that's really important, that it doesn't matter who you are or how small you are, or whether it's a group of 5 people or 100 people or 1,000 people, if it's important enough and you work hard enough at it, you can get it done.
You do have the ability to change what's not right. And that's really it.
A resolution of the City Commission of the City of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, adopting the tentative 5-year community investment plan as amended for fiscal year 2017 through fiscal year 2021. Vice Mayor Trentalis?
Yes.
Commissioner McKenzie?
Yes.
Commissioner Rogers?
Yes.
Commissioner Roberts?
Yes.
Mayor Siley?
Yes. Thank you for coming out, folks. Have a good night.
The Earth is warming. With the rising global temperatures, it is possible that the next generation will know nothing of running through a field, or any of the other wonders of nature. But one only has to look at viral marketing campaigns to know that there may be hope.
Simple H2O makes it go tick-tock. Bedal water clocks.
The Bedal water clock. Simply fill it with water, and a natural chemical reaction that occurs between 2 of its internal metallic plates generates enough eco-friendly electricity for the clock to keep perfect time and do so indefinitely. Imagine a cordless clock that's battery-free, and simple H2O that makes it go. No wonder it's catching on, and fast. Why don't you pick up a Bedal water clock yourself today?
I got this car, great. Wonderful. I bought this bag, this nice little bag, and it's going to help, the trees in the rainforest and whatever, special monkey that they've never seen in their entire lives or they couldn't give 2 shits about. But they got the bag with the monkey on it, and it's like, yeah, I spent, several $100s on this. And now, the world is going to be better because my money said so. Yeah, those people suck.
This is Amanda Juniak. She is an artist who recently moved to Seattle from her hometown of Miami. In an effort to escape the garbage-filled floods of Florida's high tides, she took a trip to Alaska only to find that there was no escape from the high water levels caused by climate change.
Miami Beach in general is, right at sea level, and, of course when the king tide rolls in, we're below sea level. City Miami too, and all the barrier islands and all that other stuff just get covered up, and that's where all your fancy condos and all that stuff, and they keep building on top of it. What's basically happening is that Miami Beach is sinking and the tide is getting higher at the same time. So as it gets warmer, the tide comes in higher during raining time and during the raining season, which is the summer, and it's absolute downpours, and it's really, it's really pretty scary because it can get 3-4 feet and you just kind of have to boat to work, or you're kind of stuck, cars get ruined.
I think there's a really important message to young people. On behalf of my generation, I am really sorry that we have left you with a really big mess. And we are dependent upon your generation to work with us to figure out ways that we are going to deal with energy, food, water, big picture sustainability questions. And what excites me about the coming generation is they don't even know that there's a box to think outside of. It's a generation that values community. They think nothing of having social media interactions with youth around the world. And we need that inventiveness, and we need that sense of global engagement to be able to create the world that my children's children will thrive in.
In In most other documentaries, this note of optimism would seem like a perfect place to stop, but reality isn't that simple. In our consumer-driven culture, there is an idea that climate change is an issue that can be solved by buying environmentally friendly new products or eating food grown near where we live. It is unfashionable to say that riding a bus is better than driving a Tesla. It is unfashionable to say that living in an urban apartment is greener than building your home out of recycled materials in the middle of the woods. It is unfashionable to say that a diet consisting of genetically modified vegetables is better for the earth than a diet based on organic cruelty-free beef. It is important that we do not give up hope for saving our species, but it is equally important that we do not misplace our hope by putting it all on water clocks.
Simple H2O makes it go tick tock. But the water clocks, la 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 la. But the water clocks.
If you've lived here for any amount of time, you've run across salmon somewhere or another. Either you eat it at a restaurant or you've seen some artwork that includes salmon. Salmon were super important to the Native Americans. That's how they survived. As Western culture arrived over here, and salmon became a huge economic importance, a great market across the world for salmon, and just part of the soul of a Washingtonian or an Oregonian or anybody from the Pacific Northwest should include salmon, basically. Numbers have dropped dramatically since the late 70s and 80s. The abundance of salmon, all species coming back, is definitely down in all watersheds throughout the Pacific Northwest. Habitat loss is a huge problem, especially for rearing juvenile fish and returning adult fish who are spawning. We build our cities along rivers and streams and waterways because it's usually an easy transport method. We also need water ourselves. It's flat, fertile ground. So over the years, we tend to congregate around watersheds. And unfortunately, by cutting down riparian zone or the vegetation that's right next to the rivers, straightening and controlling the water, not letting a stream meander or do the things that it's supposed to do, that obviously leads to a lot of habitat degradation. And so juvenile salmon and returning adult salmon don't often have as much room to spawn or habitat to support the numbers that we've seen historically. And then another big problem is that the last stage would be hydroelectric dams or fish passage blockages. It's pretty self-explanatory. If you're going to put a dam in a stream and you had salmon that went above that dam before and they can't get there anymore, that spawning ground is unavailable to those salmon, and that's going to be a big detriment to that run. Restoration projects are usually the biggest reason for trying to help bring salmon back, such as putting a lot of large woody debris or basically huge logs into the stream bed itself in order to create hard points in the stream where the water slows down and begins to meander, improves the habitat for salmon rearing tenfold. Hatchery conservation is a different method where you try to find watersheds that are geographically close together. That way you can take a broodstock from one river and then place them back in the river that needs it to help support or supplement the outmigration of salmon smolt in that river. In 1999, summer chum were listed as threatened on the endangered species list. So in 2000, we began to use a broodstock from the Union River, which is very close to the Tuhui River. And now I'm happy to say that there are several thousand summer chum coming back to the Tuhui River every year. Clear Creek here in Silverdale is an urban stream that flows through a city and a lot of suburbs areas. This restoration project is actually re-meandering two forks. What that is having log jams, having a meandering stream, not just a stream in a ditch, and allowing the stream to do its normal processes, physical processes, things like that. Overall, when this project's done, the public's going to be walking along this stream and they're going to be able to learn. A salmon-bearing stream that coexists in an urban environment. But I'll never see the results of this stream restoration. More than likely, I'm 40 years old now. It's going to take 50 years for those trees to grow and start falling in the stream. So I may never actually see the recovery of the salmon in this river. But hopefully for my grandchildren and their children, we'll be able to see things like that. And through efforts like this, educating the public, we'll be able to find better ways of building our cities and towns around salmon-bearing streams without hindering the salmon. So that's my spiel.
Being Apache, being in there, you know, we are the people. And for me being a girl, water is life. And as a woman, as being an Indigenous young woman, I want to have children. So we see that water gives life. And as a female being, I will have a child. I'm going to give life. I'll be able to carry that life. So it's not just even being Apache, it's being Indigenous and it's being a human being. To protect this water, it's something sacred because water is life. Water is what gives us nutrients, what gives the plants nutrients for us to live off of. But you know, today a lot of people think that yes, it is water to drink from. Yes, money is used to buy this. You know, they think of water, buying water. It's not that, you know, Nuggle Sun, Mother Earth, that water comes from her. And that's coming from our mother. And as me, as I want to have a child, you know, I'll be able to give off that life. So that water for me symbolizes that life that it brings, the life that a woman can bring, but also the life that Mother Earth brings to us as human beings. And now today, as these corporations want to come and destroy this water, destroy that, what is left, you know, we hardly have any water left. And so why keep contaminating what is left? What are we going to be able to drink out of? What is able to give life? Nothing if that water is contaminated, if that water is gone.
So my name is Sailesh Rao. I work with Climate Healers, which is an organization that's been around for 8 years. And we work on reversing climate change or healing the climate as opposed to maintaining it in an advanced state of disrepair. We have bought into a story of separation, that we are the only species that don't fit in the ecosystems of the planet. And that makes us behave in ways that is self-destructing. Climate change is a symptom of a socio-economic system that's in crisis. It's like the fever that the body has, and the fever is never the disease. Fever is a symptom of a disease. You know, people are talking about increasing our consumption, growing the economy to double its size by 2050, and at the same time trying to keep the global warming to less than 2 degrees C. So, which is absurd. You know, our economy is bigger than what the planet can support. So we have to really look at a different way of organizing society.
My name is Pete Sands. I'm from southern Utah. Came through here, and this climate change thing is really affecting the Navajo people because, you know, the rivers are very important, and the seasons, we do a lot of our ceremonies depending on the season, so the season has to kind of stay the way it is. So, you know, if the winter goes too long and those ceremonies we're supposed to do, it kind of interferes with that, and that's one of the big things. A lot of our grazing too, because a lot of the waters aren't running anymore. A lot of the springs are drying up, and it's just really wreaking havoc on our livestock and our well-being as well. You know, that's very important for Native Americans because water is the number one resource that we all need. You know, that's what I believe we need to protect this earth. You know, it's not just for us; it's for the young ones as well. So, yeah, the spiritual connection with water is used in our drums. You know, the drums that they use to do the ceremonies, they're usually gathered from the mountains, the sacred mountains, and the water coming from that, it's a conduit. Water is a conduit going from one plane to another, which is water is used in every ceremony that I know of, and that's how important it is to us Native Americans, the Navajo people, and that's very important.
To be known to people
out there, and it's just not our fight. It's for everybody's fight. These colors right here, the black, red, yellow, and the white, is our 4 sacred colors. And each color represents a race: the black, the indigenous people, the Asian people, and the white people. They all have a special gift to protect Mother Earth. And we need to teach that to the people. And we want them to understand that they are part of this creation. And we don't need to destroy anymore. Enough is enough.
Very clearly in Glacier National Park, the glaciers are disappearing. In 1850 or so, there probably were about 150 active glaciers. Today we're down to 25 or 30 active glaciers. These still active glaciers will become inactive in the next 10 or 15 years. And pretty soon many of them won't be glaciers at all. So. Glaciers are like banks of water up in the alpine zones. It's an enormous quantity of water, and as the glaciers melt year-round, and especially during the summertime, they're feeding cold water into the headwaters of these streams.
So if the glaciers are completely gone from these streams, the temperatures in the streams will increase dramatically over time. And eventually the stream will change from a permanent status to more temporary, so they'll dry up. There are some animals which can live in temporary streams, but the whole alpine community, for the most part, that we're working with, needs a permanent source of very cold water to survive. The animals that we're working on are animals called stoneflies. Stoneflies are a very diverse group of aquatic insects that live in streams throughout the world. So there's Lednia tumana, the meltwater stonefly. That was petitioned for protection under the Endangered Species Act due to the effects of climate change in 2007. And then another species, Zapata glacier, was petitioned in 2010. We don't know what they eat, don't really know what their life cycle is. The immature forms, the nymphs, are in the streams throughout the year. The adults emerge in the fall. They'll be crawling around on the rocks, but otherwise very little is known about them. Lednia tumana is only known from what we call the crown of the continent ecosystem. That's Glacier and Waterton National Park. We think that it probably extends up into Canada farther, but really it is a very, very restricted area that this species inhabits. So as the glaciers and snow masses decrease, the chances for the extinction of these species definitely increases.
Is it too late to do anything about climate change? And the answer is yes. I mean, we're on this freight train that is going, and the decisions we make in the next 10 to 30 years are really critical for where we're going to end up in 100 or 200 years in terms of climate change. As climates change and the conditions change in any particular spot, for a population of organisms that's in a particular spot, they have a set of choices, if you will, and they're not consciously choosing among these, but their options are they can migrate to some new place in the world. Another option is to evolve and adapt. And a final option is for groups to go extinct, and that's probably the fate of many groups that don't have options to migrate, either because of human development in nearby areas so that they can't escape northward or escape uphill, or because they're too small and they have too little genetic diversity to evolve, and over time their population sizes will decline down to some critically low level, and then all it takes is just one freak event or even just a sort of whimper as they go out with not enough reproduction in the population for those populations to go extinct.
These stoneflies, Ledney Tamana and Zapata Glacier, are just two species out of hundreds, if not thousands, of species and communities, also including human communities, which will be greatly influenced by the effects of climate change. So ultimately, the stoneflies are sort of the canary in the coal mine. They are the first species which potentially will go extinct due to the effects of climate change. People always ask me, what does it matter if these animals go extinct? And I guess we have to ask ourselves, what sort of price would you put on biodiversity? It's not just two species of rare, obscure, ugly little brown stoneflies that we're concerned with here. It's an entire community of really rare, really interesting animals that potentially could go extinct.
In the early 1600s, New York was thriving off oysters. We had over half the world's oyster population right here in New York. And on average, New Yorkers ate about 1 million oysters per day. Before New York was called the Big Apple, it was actually called the Big Oyster. In the early 1600s, when oysters were fully populated, people would just eat their oyster shells and throw them into huge piles. They used to just ground them up and put them into the cement. But this is the worst thing that you can do for the oyster population because oysters need somewhere to attach themselves onto. So an oyster larvae has a leg when it's first born, and they use that leg to swim, and they attach themselves onto something hard, ideally an oyster shell.
We are building oyster restoration stations today. This is a restoration station. There's about 250 of these now at 30 sites in all 5 boroughs hanging off the bulkhead.
This is Billion Oyster Project. We were formed in 2014. We're a nonprofit organization that's working towards reintroducing oysters back into the New York Harbor. We do this with the help of New York Harbor School, which is a maritime-based high school that's here on Governor's Island.
I'm a senior at the New York Harbor School. I'm in an aquaculture program. I've been doing this for 3 years, the cage building, and I grow the oysters and maintain them. So this summer I had to go out to different sites and plant oysters and also go back to them to look if they're healthy or not.
The mesh around, just like a lobster.
So it's kind of hard for me to get adjusted to all this outdoor activities because I'm a city kid. But after a while I got used to it and it was really fun. It meant a lot to actually help the city out.
90% of oyster reefs have been destroyed by humans worldwide, making them the most impacted marine ecosystem on the planet.
Here are some sick oysters.
In the early 1900s, the Industrial Revolution happened, so it's just a lot of factories that were being built around the harbor, and people didn't get rid of their waste properly. That poisoned a lot of our oysters. It created a lot of diseases. There was a point in time when they were on the brink of extinction. They weren't in actual reef structures like they used to be. We have a 20-year goal to reintroduce 1 billion oysters back into the New York Harbor by 2035. Currently, we're at about 20 million.
The flagship brewery asked us to come and collect shells from their oyster festival. So what we literally do is collect shells from events like this. We also collect from over 50 restaurants in Manhattan and Brooklyn. And we'll take them back to our depot. And then with New York Harbor School students, we actually seed the oyster shells with larvae, and we grow new oysters using the recycled shell as a substrate.
Oysters are one of the biggest ways to save our waters. One of the reasons why Billion Oyster Project specifically chose oysters to put back in the New York Harbor is because, one, they're native species. They also help to filter the waters. One oyster, an adult oyster, which is about 2 years old and about the size of your palm, can filter about 50 gallons of water in a day. We estimated that once we have about 1 billion oysters in our water, it will be able to filter all of New York Harbor every 3 days.
The water is a great sink. It seeks its own level, and it's definitely a holy element that we all need. I was a commercial fisherman for 40 years, owned a couple of boats and ran other people's boats. So I came down to California and bought my first boat, and I fished salmon and tuna with that boat for about 8 or 9 years. Ended up building another boat for herring, and the herring was more like shoveling fish, it's walking on fish, and it was more of a grab. It happened in such a short time that everybody just jumped all over it. And it's kind of ugly to be around that. So I started just changing my way to do it. I just stayed away from the fleet. They would be starting to work on the quota out in the deeper water before the fish were ready to come in. And I would just sit there and I'd watch these boats get lower and lower in the water, and there's no fish around my boat at all. And I just had to sit there and say, well, this is part of the discipline of doing it the right way and trying to get the high quality fish. Every couple of years they would scale down and go to a smaller mesh, and we would get younger fish. And I started lobbying for larger nets, which finally came to pass, but it was basically a little bit too late. The last time I shipped my boat to Alaska was '96. I sold my permits up there and I quit shipping my boat up there. And that's when I started my meditation. At that time, I didn't really feel the need to be aware of other sentient beings and not kill them for money. But my spiritual teacher was telling me that, not to, so I didn't. It's pretty evident from meditating that you don't want to kill anything. I could go out with my little boat and go hook a nice salmon, but I just don't want to. That's my edge. I'll eat a salmon a friend of mine caught, but I just don't want to go out and kill one. Well, my love for the water has always been there. All of us 6 brothers and sisters learned how to swim at an early age. That was something we all did. So I feel like I'm on a boat when I go out there in the morning and I get out. I jump off the beach and I start swimming out. It feels like I'm leaving port. When I'm swimming, I get in a rhythm out there in my breathing, and the mantra does come to mind. It's just like when I hear the ocean, and it's divine. My mantra is what St. Francis said as his mantra. It's simply my God and my all. I repeat it and I write it and I sing it. You try to weave your meditation throughout the day, really being aware of what's going on around you, and not everything for you, everything's for everybody else. Really, your will is there to want to help. And sometimes just, smiling or acknowledging somebody or any little thing, being courteous, that's a very small thing, but it's a big thing, really. It's a big thing when in the grand scheme of things, I think. It's really a great dynamic. It turns everything on its ear. And things happen for you because of that. Where I am on my path, I'm not quantifying it. I'm okay with where I am. I am where I'm supposed to be. We all do our own dharma. That's part of liking yourself and part of, being okay with where you're at. When I'm not moving forward on my spiritual path, I'm trying to at least face the right direction. It's just really anchoring and really centering. It's the peace that passes understanding. We don't understand it. There's a unity in all animals, and we're part of that unity. It's all together. It's not the animals are over here and then the well-being of people are over here. You can't separate any of that. It's all one thing. So we don't see how the things are connected sometimes, but they are. We just have to have faith that they are connected, and what our actions do have reactions and have effects.
I dream of animals all the time, and I remember calling out to this little cub and calling him by a name that I didn't even know, Brutus. I didn't think twice about it. Brutus and Caesar, the ultimate betrayal. Because of Brutus, I have a responsibility to not only him, but to grizzly bears in general. The gift that he's given me, the perspective that he has shown that a grizzly bear can be, to turn your back on them. That's betrayal. I have a responsibility now, because I have heard that voice. I have gotten to know them, to share that with people. The days are gone where we don't listen anymore. It's time to listen, and it's time to do the right thing. We think about wilderness and we imagine what that looks like. We think of this place far on top of the mountains where no one's ever gone before. It's what Lewis and Clark encountered when they came to the West. That place hardly even exists anymore. What wilderness really is a place that we allow wild to be. There's this weird blending of both worlds that occurs, where bears and humans and cows and fences all intertwine. And why it works is because the people who live there allow it to happen. And one thing that's never gonna happen, not anytime soon, is that humans are gonna go away. So these animals are adapting and trying to survive with this storm of humans that are just taking up all these little pockets that we once called wilderness. But the only thing that keeps them from having that is the human's choice to have them there and let wild be. In this place, it's the best we have now. And the bears are thriving there because of the people and their heart and them allowing wild to be. You know, these little cubs were born and they go out and they cross a barbed wire fence. And they go over and scratch their back on a barn. And they cross a road. They don't have an image of wilderness that has none of this. This is what wilderness is to them. We see it as, you know, two contrasting places butted up next to each other. And we need to not see it that way. But when a bear looks at it, it doesn't see two worlds, it sees one big world. It sees home. And it's okay. And people who are conservationists have this idea, this heaven, that does not exist, that we're trying to achieve. And that's wrong. We're shooting for something that can never happen. We're too far. And so what we have now is a grizzly bear by a fence and a road that's thriving. That's the real story. Don't crop out reality. Embrace it. It's taken them 30 years of protection to let their guard down, that they can live in this valley with these ranches and cattle and get along, to look at a human and not see an enemy. And then next year, when they come out of the den, all those rules can be erased. And now this guy might have you in the crosshairs of his rifle and be pulling the trigger, and you don't have your guard up. That's a nightmare. It's not fair. It's simply not fair. You know, this isn't about delisting. It's about how we should treat the animals that we live on the planet with. I think that people are going to look back on these days and the choices that we're making about the beings that we share this earth with, and they're going to say to themselves, what the heck were we thinking? In my mind is that that's one story. And now we're writing a new story. And this is going to change that. It's going to change that perception. When you hear the word Brutus, maybe it's now going to be a story about two best friends that never betray each other.